Hello, everybody, and a really warm welcome to another courageous conversation where we are celebrating the voices and the wisdom and the courage of the women in our network. Excuse me, I have a bit of a frog because I had the flu a couple of weeks ago. So today I'm really excited to be speaking with Dr. Tamsin Kerr. Hi, Tamsin.
Hi, Pollyanna. Very good to be here.
Yeah, and for those of you who don't know me, my name's Pollyanna and I look after community engagement for Tree Sisters, and I also head up Tree Sisters in Australia. So before we get stuck in, I'm just going to share with you a little about Tamsin. So Tamsin is a writer and artist who directs the Cooroora Institute so as to share the song of the earth through creative practice. Previous lives include senior bureaucratic and academic work in environmental planning and social policy across all levels of government, as well as a family immersed in art and architectural heritage. Tamsin has a PhD in conversations with the Bunyip and has given talks and readings around the world. Now she lives among the trees in the Noosa hinterland, listening to birdsong and sensing the fungi. She's on the cusp of grandmotherhood. Her tree word art has hung in several galleries. She's a published poet, building emotive connection through her words. Tamsin's current project, in response to fires and contagion, connects women to facilitate better forms of governance that considers and cares for this more than human earth. I love your bio. I find it so inspiring. So let's begin with the question that I always ask, which is, why are you a tree sister?
Because many trees I live with here are my sisters. That's a very banal comment, isn't it? But this tree right behind me is a silky oak, and it's been here. I planted it about 20 years ago, and when we moved to this place, it was an old dairy and it had no trees, and we planted 2,000 trees, and they're gradually becoming a forest. And because I've been here for so long now, I am here long enough that the trees have noticed me. And so I do have some form of conversation with them, and it changes the way you see the world and makes you look beneath the shallow everyday processes. And so the idea that we could have more conversations with trees might make us more connected to the flow of this earth that we inhabit, and that would change the way we live, as well as there's an invisible quality that trees have, and so many other things that have been made invisible. I think women have been made invisible many times, and the people who are cleaners who come in, there's always a plot in every this is a very long answer, but it's always the plot in every detective fiction movie. It's always a cleaner who does it because no one ever notices the cleaner. So we've tended to put our attention and our value on people who perform badly above us, or who are seeking who believe that power is only held in being very visible. Meanwhile, there are these mycelium networks and fungi connections that the trees manage or are managed by. I'm not quite sure. In fact, it's not that sort of relationship. It's obviously a much more symbiotic and collaborative process than anyone being in a hierarchy. And meanwhile, there are the things that are invisible are starting to get so much more traction and sway in the world. And there is nothing more clearer than that, than the COVID-19, and there's this little invisible nothing that we have given no value to. And suddenly it shows up all these powerful governments as what they are, which is that they don't have power, they don't have They don't have the sway of how we will live in this world. And it has come at a time when we were all starting to feel that anyway. And now it's being demonstrated right before our eyes. So for all those reasons, women and trees are a wonderful metaphor, at least, if not an important symbol for this new world that we are now moving into. And it's all those things that we have treated as lower than us, and now we're seeing that they're the things that really matter. They're the things that have value. So Tree Sisters is it.
I'm really struck in what you're saying by you know, often when people talk about the non-visible, you know, and the things that are invisible, they're referring to sort of otherworldly stuff or the supernatural or, you know, something spiritual. It's so interesting to me that you're referring to very earthly, worldly things, but it just so happens that we can't see them.
Yes.
I think there's something really really fascinating and profound in that, to think, oh, well, the invisible world is actually what we can't see here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we're a species that is very limited by the fact that the visual is our most important sense. And so we keep thinking that the visual is what matters. And that's become taken to extremes where you have, I don't know, the Kardashians who try to be the most visible, you know, or in fact Trump or ScoMo or any of them, you know, all that, what I have to term as vomit, which is very old men in ties. Or heroes, which is a much longer acronym, but I just developed this with a group of other, I'd call them Tree Sisters, in a car driving up to a celebration of women at Gympie Regional Gallery, and we came up with huge egos rescuing obsolete economic systems.
Oh, that's brilliant. I love that.
We no longer need vomit or heroes. What we need, Tree Sisters. what we need is a focus on the things that we need to recognize the invisible and the importance of that for how this world thrives and survives and flourishes. And so that impulse that so many of us have to go out and plant more trees is really about making that those underground connections so much more important. You know, we've lived for a long time, heaven has always been more important than hell. You know, the above has always been more important than the below. And suddenly the world is turned upside down. And here we are starting to go, hang on, the below might be more important. It might be the way the fungal and mycelium networks happen and connect all the forests and all the people. And it might be not the, I don't know, what's the name, Kim Kardashian. It might be actually the cleaner who comes and makes sure that your door handle is free of COVID. You know, it might be those people who we have not paid attention to, those sentient beings we have not paid attention to, that really play the most important role in why this world is as it is, why it is so beautiful and green and fecund and full of birds and song. And you know that the vomit and heroes have been setting up systems which have been trying to destroy that, and now those systems are suddenly completely thrown out. And doesn't it feel silly when you sit there and watch TV now and you see an ad for something and you think, well, that's a bit, it's becoming more and more meaningless, you know, like
yes,
we're not,
that's so true.
We're not going to solve it by buying the next whatever it is car that comes along. You know, we're going to solve it by inhabiting the slow places and slowing down, and thank goodness that's what we're doing. We're, you know, that suddenly the birds in the last the last month really have been so much more loud and celebratory, you know, and I think they're part of this whole environment of suddenly the world is a little calmer from this excessive human busyness, and suddenly there's no planes in the sky, or there's a lot less, and nature can take back a little and rejuvenate and restore, and you know, there's this feeling of celebration outside of the human world that isn't about panic and fear. So the more that we connect with the natural world around us, the more we will calm, I think. And that's something I've been trying to practice for a very long time anyway. And I think that I've got so many friends who go, what? But this is what I've always been doing. and you know, that's sort of nice that this kind of slower, calmer, quieter, more inhabiting of the flow of a place is starting to be our main option.
Yeah, it's interesting. A tree sister shared in our online community, The Nest, yesterday. She shared a really beautiful video of, because I'd asked this question about, you know, what's emerging for you in this slowing down. And she had gone outside where she is and she saw 12 eagles circling above, 12. And she's never seen 12 eagles in the sky above her. And she shared a video of it. And when I watched it, I could feel like this sense of expansion for the natural world, of like, there's so much sky right here that there's 12 eagles able to fly together. And it really struck me that we haven't had, I mean, this opportunity of quietness, I don't think it's been there in my lifetime, except perhaps on a Sunday, but then there's still planes flying. So, and I wanted to pick up something you said about, you know, the ads for unnecessary things, because here everybody's, not only have they panic bought the toilet roll and the food, but they've also panic bought all the seedlings and most of the seeds. So, and I was like, oh, I can't buy seedlings. And somebody sent me a video of, you know, making seedling trays out of egg cartons. So I was busy making seedling trays out of egg cartons. And then I thought, why do we have seedling trays made out of plastic when we can just make them out of egg cartons? Like, what's the point of that? And I can feel the layer of conditioning, you know, of unthought about things, you know, things that are just there and we just kind of do them, and they're unthought about because they're so not significant to our lives, like, you know, those black plastic seedling things that you get. That you just don't, it's just like, that's what you do until you can't, right? So
well, it's just like plastic bags, you know, withdrawing the big plastic bags, at least from the supermarket, you know, like there was maybe a little bit of outcry about it, but then the next week there's all these tough burly men walking into the IGA with, you know, all their extra bags that they've bought, you know, and no one's even questioning it. And now it's like, it took nothing to get us to change, really, you know. And here is, and it's going to take it. We were asking ourselves, what's it going to get humans to change for climate change? And we now know the answer. It's nature and a very small invisible thing that will get us all changing. And I really hope that's what it does. I really hope that lots of people are still talking about, oh, when this is over, we can go back to normal. And I go, well, no, I really hope that this will take enough time that our habits and our questions, those things that you were just talking about, of why are we using these things? Why are we, you know, that we will have seen enough of how we can live without them, that will seem like the best alternative. And that's my hope. And if I die from COVID and it doesn't happen, I will come back and be a ghost in the machine and make every bloody plane fall out of the sky.
So
That's enough of that.
I'm really curious about how you kind of, well, I suppose this is about the journey of the Cooroora Institute, which you created, and how you went from academia and, you know, sort of government stuff into this deeply creative place where, you know, you even did a PhD on the bunyip of all things. And it would be lovely if you would explain for people outside Australia what a bunyip is as well as part of that.
Yes. All right. Well, I mean, there's a very long version and there's a short version, and I don't know. Anyway, I'll just go along. You can tell me to shut up. I mean, I was working as a head of a section in a department, and anyway, my mentor there, who had encouraged me into being there and to doing things differently, there was a double change of government and a whole lot of money was withdrawn from the major things that we were involved in, and various other things happened. Anyway, she killed herself.
Oh,
And
no.
that was a really big thing for me, of course. And it made me think, well, what am I doing here? And why am I doing it this way? And I tried to keep going with her legacy and approach, but it was clear within about a year that I was not going to be able to do it, because there'd been such a change of attitude across all of government. And so I also had a bit of a breakdown, of course. So I went away and studied it. I did an honours thesis about this process, and about environmental planning and public participation and all the things that I had been passionate about. And so I then got offered some teaching work within the university. And that moved me back to Queensland. I was working in the ACT in Canberra, of course, and then I decided, along with my partner, that we really didn't want to go back into that system. So we started looking for places, but I imagined that we'd be living somewhere in Victoria. I don't know why. Anyway, we drove past. We helped do a plantation about quite a lot of 15 years beforehand, that was way up near Gympie, and so we went up to. They said, come up and help us do some thinnings and see how it's all gone. And so we stayed up there, and on our way back, we drove past this sign on the road that said, "Earth covered home for sale." And so I said, "Oh, we're both into alternative architecture. Let's go in and have a look." So we drove down and had a look, and it was all very exciting. And we knew who the architect was. And so we got on well with the sellers. And anyway, we then went back to our, to my lecturing and work. And about a week later, I turned to my partner and said, "I don't think that I can get that place out of my mind." And so we bought it. Which was and we sold everything up in Canberra and we moved up here. And then we had this, well, what are we going to do? And for a little while, I did some other work with local council and things, but really my heart was in the idea of doing it very differently. And so I ended up deciding to do my PhD. And I didn't decide to do a PhD about bunyips at all. I decided to do a PhD about, economic revitalization of small country towns. But unfortunately, the bunyip, who is a sort of mythological creature who inhabits swamps and possibly eats small children, definitely is a swimming pool fence for small children anyway, but also at a much deeper level arbitrates on poor use of environmental resources, and on an even deeper level it gets more and more complicated. But the bunyip comes out of an Indigenous word which actually comes from the northwest of Victoria, and there are many different words for the bunyip across Australia because there are many different Indigenous languages, but it's become a generic term for a monster that lives and speaks for the bush and speaks for country. So if you can't imagine that country can speak for itself, which most of us are not quite that good at, then you create this monster that is capable of inducing great fear, that will speak for country fiercely, so that you behave well in country and you don't take too many resources and you don't overuse the place. And for some reason, the bunyip just came burbling up in my thesis and I could not get rid of it. So he just took over. And so I ended up having this long conversation with the bunyip about how we might celebrate the wild and re-inhabit it. And the bunyip, of course, would play a fairly critical role in that. And the bunyip was a wonderful thing because it took me all around the world, and I went to, I spoke at the Guggenheim in Spain and at the Smithsonian and in Indiana and in United States, and she was a great gift for me, and that a lot of the work that I came to was that we needed to have a more creative and imaginative and artistic approach to how we deal with the wild, because science had basically been giving us lots of J curves. So, everything is coming to a point of disaster. And so science was a bit like Cassandra. I was an environmental scientist. And science was saying the world is coming to an end, and everyone was going, la, 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 we're not listening. And so it seemed a much better way to use the arts and the creative work to get people engaged back into the flow of the places they inhabit. And that would be a far more effective way, a change agent. So that's really where Cooroora was born. But I found, because I was being invited around the world to speak quite a lot, I always had to fill online forms that had institutions' name, and I was writing Griffith University with some irritation because I was no longer with them. In fact, they'd sort of said, although I'd been voted the best lecturer by all the students of the whole course, they decided they didn't really need someone teaching about community development or public participation, because that was just a box that you could tick. The place was pretty full of vomit, I have to say. Anyway, will you get sued for libel? No, probably not. Anyway, so this was, I just made up. We have the Cooroora Mountain is our view, and we look across the valley to the Cooroora Mountain. And when people were asking me, who's your supervisor? Because I mainly did it from here and talked to bunyips, I used to say Cooroora Mountain. And so it was obvious to me when I had to put the name of an institution, I just wrote Cooroora Institute. And so that I could fill in.
Wow.
So it was just a piece of paper, but you should never, ever create anything if you don't want it to take over your life. So it has. and sharing the song of the earth through creative practice has engaged so many people in so many ways, and it has been collective and collaborative, and it's not just people, it's been collaborative with all the natural world around us, so that we've taken the prints off trees and read them into words. We've used birdsong and created the sound forms of birdsong into furniture. So that it's this constant collaboration. And at the moment, we've had a lot of poetry and creating poetry that's around celebrating place and connecting to place. So that, of course, we had a lot of other plans for this year. We were going to have a blacksmith come from United States, this fantastic woman who does courses for women, blacksmithing courses for women. We were going to have a couple of Indigenous elders from here talking about language of country. We're going to have some weaving, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that is all on hold and probably will happen in a different way. But it's very nice to actually just be quiet, because sometimes you get so caught up in getting a little busy and trying to save the world or whatever it is that your passion is, that you forget to just stop and to be quiet and to listen, you know. And I think here is this great opportunity for all of us to listen. And the longer that you are still in a place, the more you become part of that place. So in lots of ways, you become more indigenous to place, and you get more connected to something beyond just the human and the human interests. And we do human connection pretty well. And that's obvious now, you know, that everyone's looking out for each other and caring and connecting. But this is enough time and space that we might actually do beyond the human connection pretty well too, you know, that maybe when we can't hug each other, we can hug trees. Maybe when we can't listen to another's voice, we can listen to another's voice of the birds or of the frogs. Maybe we can go out and look at the stars at night rather than listen to the panic on the TV. Maybe, you know, there are things that we need to do for our own mental health at this point that are really powerfully going to reground us. I always say I run a course called Poetics of Place, and in that people get to spend quite a long time just sitting in a single place with a few sentient beings around them and getting to speak their language and to put that down into a book around with maybe words or pictures or all sorts of different images and approaches. But the thing, when people say, oh, I don't have time for that, you know, because it takes a weekend at least. And so they go, what can I do quickly? You know, it's like that question about, you know, how can I get nirvana without having to meditate for more than, you know, 2 minutes a day? You know? So, but there is a quick solution, and that is that you just take your shoes off and go and find some mud. And this is a good time in our place at this stage to find mud because it's been raining a bit. And put your feet in the mud and just listen, and try not to swat too many mosquitoes and black flies. But that putting your feet in the mud is starting to connect you again to the earth, literally and figuratively, but also to all that below ground, invisible, important action that's happening on this planet. And suddenly that in itself starts to have a transformative process. So I think there's all these things we can do that are about acknowledging and valuing these other sentient beings around us, some of which we cannot see.
And what do you think about people who are living, you know, like you and I are very lucky because we live close to nature, and you know, there are lots of tree sisters that do, but there are also a lot of people who are in apartments or in cities, or, you know, they don't have that same opportunity, especially right now. How do we make that connection to place when, you know, nature excuse me, nature's not on our doorstep?
I mean, there's I should have got this poem out. I knew I should have got this poem out. I didn't. Anyway, there's a poet whose name I cannot remember, but he talks about how the wild is within us rather than without us, and it lies around us all the time. So I talked about this in my thesis as well, because of course, yes, it's very easy to understand place and nature if you live in the midst of all the green trees around you and all the rest of it. It is much harder if you're in a small flat that doesn't even have any ground around it, you know. So, but there are obviously ways that you can deal with that. You can go to local parks and make, when I lived in Canberra, one of the things I used to do was every time I'd come back from work, I would walk up the mountain, Mount Ainslie, and spend time there. And I had a specific place that I became quite acquainted with. And I would be there for an hour as many days as I could, probably about 4 days a week. And just, it became really important to me, you know, and it had that connective force in just the same way. You don't have to own it to feel it. Of course, you can borrow it. You can go to public spaces, but even if you're stuck in your house and you're disabled or unable to go out, you know, there are these ways to connect. I mean, you can look out windows if you're lucky, or you can just sense down, you know, and underneath all this building and concrete and tar and all the rest of it, there's the earth, and it's still always there. And the power of our own imagination and our own wild within us allows us to draw up that sense of earth and wild, even in the most oppressive of environments. And so you can hold the wild within you. And in fact, oh, what's his name? Some famous person. Come on, Tamsin. Oh dear. Thoreau, you know, who wrote, he's America's greatest nature writer, supposedly. Well, he didn't actually write about nature at all. He wrote about he was really questioning the economic systems that were set up. And so he went to Walden Pond because he was really trying to question the way that we needed to spend so much money and have so much things. And so he became a sort of hermit for a couple of years and demonstrated, and he kept very precise records of exactly what he spent on what and how little it was and what he needed and what he didn't need. So he was really demonstrating that he was really questioning the whole economic system that we are still striving, thriving, not surviving under. But he talks about that even, I mean, Walden Pond, where he was a swamp. It wasn't particularly attractive. And in fact, in reality, he did go home to his mum quite a lot and get her to do his washing and feed him meals. But anyway, that's another matter. That's a little sacrosanct to, he's such an important figure. You can't make these sort of claims too much. But he also talked about the wild within and how important it was to connect with the wild within. And he had that same thing of, oh, well, you're living in it, you know, so you're not having the problems, but how do other people do this? And so that concept of the wild within or the wild beneath, and that's really what I developed more from talking to bunyips, is that the wild often lies beneath, you know, and it's actually what lies beneath that determine how we are, so that it doesn't matter what lies above. What lies above makes a really big difference for how easily we can imagine that connective force. So if we have lots of trees, it's much easier. If we have a large amount of concrete jungles, then it requires more imagination and more creativity. So that's what we all need.
Up there. There's so much to dive into in all of that. One of the things that struck me was that, you know, when you're talking about you know, people not having time for poetry, you know, like as soon as I saw the work that you're doing at the Cooroora Institute, when I first came across it, this sort of great yearning, you know, to participate in that kind of work where there is slowness and there is creativity, and there is, you know, the doing of creative things for no purpose, for no, you know, it's going to get me somewhere or earn me money or, you know, whatever, for its own sake. But, you know, I have to feel guilty when you talk, because I have that same thing of like, where do I fit that in? And, you know, if I fit it in, it just becomes another thing that I have to do. And so, and I'm really aware right now of how grateful I am for the slowness in the world. You know, like I love
Yes.
Sundays. Sundays are my favorite days. So, you know, and I loved traveling when I was a younger person. I loved that sense of nowhere to have to be, nothing to have to do, you know, the expansiveness of that. And I love it on, you know, on a Sunday morning when you wake up and you can feel that a lot of the rest of the world around you is not doing anything right now. You know, there's no like rush to work, there's no kind of all this business going on. And it kind of feels like every day is Sunday right now. But I'm still aware of the piece of me, the dynamic, sort of more driven part of me that is, you know, like it's hard to get that piece to settle down. And I've still got, I guess what I'm thinking is that I've still got a level of resistance
Of course.
to actually, you know, going and doing these things. I think part of it's fear, you know, that I might go and nothing will happen. And nothing will talk to me, and I won't get anywhere, and I won't be able to create anything, and I'll just sit there and go, oh, you know. So I'm interested in your thoughts about all of that.
Oh, absolutely. Look, I think at the moment it's when I came here with the intention of trying to slow down, and I went after 3 months. I went, oh fuck, I don't want to do that. So I went and got a job. You know, I went and worked for local government, and I did an interesting work where I did connected people who across many different ethnic backgrounds, and yeah, so I enjoyed it, but it was really just because I was scared. Suddenly there was this great opening, and I didn't want to, and so it takes months, in fact it probably takes years. I mean, that's why you can't become indigenous to a place like that. You know, it takes years, and I'd say at least 10 probably, which is and you don't have to do it in a single place. You can move, but you have to move with that same intention of slowing. And what I see happening at the moment as a result of COVID is even listening to the drum, or, you know, like the level of panic in people's voices is much higher, you know. And when the idea of this debate about whether schools should close or not, you know, what I see from my friends is parents who are going, oh, how the hell will I manage? You know, I can't do kids. And so what they do then go, okay, we're going to have the kids home, and we're going to have mathematics at 9 o'clock, and then we're going to have, you know, and then we're going to do this. And I've got a whole program set out, and it's all going, we're going to keep everything, you know, like this. And so we have this kind of response to it all. And I ended up homeschooling my youngest daughter because she had a few issues that, you know, it just wasn't working for her. And I did the same, you know, for the first little while. I'm like, okay, I have a full week planned out, and I have it all, you know. And after she'd been home for a year or two, probably 2 years, I realized this was absolutely stupid, and that she was learning far more just being with me, and, you know, helping and doing and being in the flow. And she wrote poems about the kingfisher that came and settled beside where we were working, and she allowed her imagination to grow, and she had the space and the place to do that. And I stopped trying to make her remember what 10 times 10 was, you know, because it just the things that became important were very different. And I think that the response to the idea of having kids at home, and it's not everyone. I mean, there are lots of people who are going, oh, thank goodness I can spend time with my family. But I've seen so many people saying, I love everyone, even my family, even though they're here with me all the time. Oh, you know, so it's that whole issue is symbolic or of a much wider issue about how, you know, we all have to be busy. We have to be paid. We have to be engaged in someone else's agenda all the time. And the idea that we might be engaged in something else's agenda, like Earth's, is a pretty rare concept, really. And it takes time to decide that those non-humans actually have value and that they have things they can teach us. So I have always tried to have
the Whitbirds are agreeing with you.
They are, absolutely they are. And one time when I was doing the language of country with Beverly Hand, I had this a water dragon who decided, yep, this is what everyone needs to be doing, and just came up to me and sat on me, and I tickled his throat, and he was there for the performance of showing how you can collaborate with nature. And no, he wouldn't go near anyone else. And it was just, he was absolutely part of this teaching process, you know, and he was teaching something that was really important. Just like, well, the whitbirds are right here now. This morning they were all kookaburras. So there's so much action. And we've got a little yellow robin that comes and constantly has things to say. And the dove, the peaceful dove, I don't know if I should tell this story. I am all mad, it's good. But about in September, the peaceful dove started coming and sitting right on the balcony beside here and going, it's a war, it's a war, it's a war. And it was really clear. And I'm like, what do you mean it's a war? You know, I don't understand. This is a very English translation of what you're saying, but it was really clear. And the dove has never said that to me before. And it kept saying it. And then here we are, you know, we are in this war, you know, we are in this war with the natural world, really. And I'm rather hopeful that nature will win. But it was, I think doves have always been a communicator. They're one of the first communicators for humans. And, you know, you can see that in the story of the ark and the dove out. You can see that there's so many issues. And I was talking about this to someone else and they said, when I was a kid, I always thought the doves talked to me. And then I decided that that couldn't be true. And I put it out of my mind, you know, and suddenly he went, I'm going to go listen to doves, you know. So, yeah, I think there are all these languages out there that if we were slower, we would hear.
And so why do you think we're so afraid of the slowing down? Like, why am I afraid to go and sit out there and, you know, I know when I do it, I love it. And I don't mean specifically me. I just wonder as a, you know, as a culture, why we're so afraid to be in that place of slowness. And, you know, like, do you think it's because we don't want to be with ourselves, or we'll find out things we don't want to know, or, you know, what is it that because I wonder if some of the panic now is about that. It's about that.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I have
the putting down.
A part of it is a political economic answer, which is capitalism, you know, and it has taught us that we have to keep climbing the ladder and going faster and faster and getting unhappier and happier, and solving our problems with more and more things, and that will sort of get us out of it. And, you know, capitalism has always treated place as generica. Nothing is unique to the places we are. So every place, you can put a McDonald's anywhere and you can put the same food pretty much anywhere, and that will solve everyone's problems, you know, that sort of, so there's been this, we've been held in a system which is, it's in its interests to make us thoughtlessly busy and therefore consuming, and of pieces of useless plastic that die, you know, like why, you know, why we are, I don't know, instead of understanding that idea that nature itself could provide. So that's my sort of political or economic sort of answer. But there's also, I think about this story about anthropologist who went and talked to a young American Indian woman, and I don't know the full, I can't remember the full details, but he basically said to her, she spent a lot of time by herself doing work in a wild place. And he said to her, well, don't you ever get lonely? And she said she couldn't understand the question. And it was like they were talking on two different levels entirely. And and finally, when it was unpacked took a long time, she said, but I have all these beings around me all the time talking to me. How could I ever be lonely? You know, and we have cut ourselves off from that by putting ourselves in, you know, air conditioned, insulated, closed off, you know, very human dense places. I love human dense because it has all sorts of multiple meanings. And that has made it really hard to do that, to make that connective process with these other sentient beings around us, these other nations, you know, that we inhabit. And then we've got Christianity and such like that has, you know, come through and cut down the trees and said, you know, hard work is the only answer, and that, you know, so we've just got a whole lot of systems that have been in place for a very long time that have been channeling us into this fear, you know, and it's, you can see it now, you know, after the bushfires, there was this fear of nature even worse, you know, it was like, oh, quick, get rid of it all because it's just going to kill us. Well, it probably will, but it might be a little smaller than a bushfire. And that the idea that that we could befriend it is quite a scary and horrifying concept that we have poo-pooed and turned into, oh yes, small children might think that, you know. The Bunyip, for instance, has become the story for small children and not being given any other seriousness almost by anyone, you know, like it's so there's this voice of nature that we have all been trained so hard to pretend does not exist. And again, it's that kind of the things that we can't value that are more invisible, that that are tricky. And yeah, we've had people come here who, when they first come, they go, oh, I've never been anywhere so quiet, and there's all these other snakes, you know, you know, and what's that? And oh, you know, and after, you know, if they come and do a woodworking class every week, for instance, they don't get taught. They come and go, oh, by the weekend, I'd like to have a dining table and 5 chairs. You go, yes, come along and see whether you like it, and then you can go. And the first few lessons are all about this slowness and about understanding the wood and the trees and the timber. And so then understanding the way that the grain moves and how you can work with and against a grain. And so that there's all these other lessons that come out of that. And we had this one guy who was he'd been a stockbroker on the floor and, you know, had a really high level job, and then he'd had an accident and he had to slow down. And he came here and started off with exactly that attitude. And within a year, he was saying to everyone else, no, just slow down and feel space, you know. And people who've come here say, you know, when they had to move for jobs or for whatever reason that happened, they're saying, I love this day where I just come here and I am in this place and I'm of this place, and I connect to this place, and I use natural materials, and they ground me, and it changes the way I am, and I'm going to so miss that. But there are those opportunities around us everywhere. You know, there are places everywhere that offers these sort of slow, grounded, creative, connective activities with natural materials that that also help slow us and change us without being too challenging. Because you can say to your friends, "Oh yeah, I'm going off to my woodworking class," you know, and everyone goes, "Oh yeah, that's good. You'll be making a bed soon," you know.
Yeah.
And so there's a sort of, although a lot of partners used to say, "Where is it? what have you produced?" And at the end of the year, there was always something beautiful, you know. So we'd have an exhibition of work of all these different things that had been produced. But the thing that had really been produced was not just the product, although the product ended up symbolizing that change connection with slower measure and rhythm that we can find when we really sink down into ourselves.
Yeah,
And if
I love
this
that.
is the opportunity now to do that, then when is it? You know, this is so take a deep breath if you can, and dive in, you know, because here's this great opportunity for I'm hoping an ongoing moment of calming and slowing and connecting with things that aren't just human.
Yeah. While you were speaking, oh God, there it is again, the frog. While you were speaking, there's a little bird that I really love. It's a yellow-breasted robin. I don't know what its proper name is, but lives in the rainforest. And
yeah,
over the years, you know, I've walked in different places, and always in some of those places, the robin will come along, you know.
yeah, they're very curious birds.
Yes. And then we just recently moved to this place here, and this is the first time I've lived where there are yellow robins, and it's so exciting for me because obviously in my somewhere I have like a sense of they're being in some kind of relationship with them. And while you were speaking, the robin just came to the gate outside my window and was sort of hopping about.
Yeah, what's going on? What's the story? I know whenever I have anyone coming here, the little yellow robin comes and sits right beside in this tree that's right here, and just goes, "Okay, who's that? What's going on?" But I mean, he's very vain. He loves looking at himself in the mirror, and he just like he's, you know, like he has flaws, but he's always curious about what's going on and interested and engaged, and so he's here every day, you know. But so is the water dragon, you know. The water dragon, I've started calling the head librarian. He's very into jazz. I don't play jazz very much, but whenever I do, he suddenly settles up and sits there really listening. So I figured he might have been lizard in the past. I don't know. But he climbs up the ladder into the library, and he sits in the library window when there's sun. And there is no one who's being a very good librarian here at the moment, so he's not very good. He does add a bit of his own waste to various books, but yeah, you know, I think if Terry Pratchett can have a orangutan as a head librarian, I can have a water dragon. I like the idea of dragon librarian.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm conscious of the time and the need to wrap up, and so it's been wonderful. I could just keep talking to you for hours on end. Is there something that you would like to share to close?
Yes, well, I am a poet, and I have a lot of poetry that I've written, but I also read a lot of poetry, and I thought this particular poem might be a nice way to finish. So this is Mary Oliver, who died last year, or was it 2 years ago? Anyway, she's an American poet who writes a lot about nature and connection, and she's one of my favorite poems, and this is probably my favorite poem. And I thought it was really appropriate for this time and this place. Wild geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pollyanna. It's been a delight.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we will be bringing you another courageous conversation last Friday of the month. We're going to do them, and I hope to see you then. And thanks for watching, and thank you so much, Tamsin.
Thank you.